We are less than 3 weeks away from the trade deadline, and the Flames picture might finally be getting a little clearer.
You're Locked On Flames, your daily podcast on the Calgary Flames. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Locked On Flames. As always, I'm your host, Jess Belmosto. I've been hosting this show now for 4 years this month, which is absolutely crazy. And my now full-time partner in crime, Nick Zeraris. Nick, how are you doing?
I'm very tired. Being outside at the Stadium Series all day, it wasn't that cold, but 6 hours of being in the cold, it accumulates.
It does something to you.
Yeah.
Well, today we are going to be talking all about the trade deadline and the positive, optimistic outlook on the rest of this season, as much as we can sell you on it. But first, today's episode is brought to you by Sleeper. Download the Sleeper app and use promo code LOCKEDONNHL to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. See Sleeper's terms of use for details. So make sure you subscribe to Locked On Flames wherever you're getting your podcasts, because we're here for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, your team every day. And this is the place to be ahead of the trade deadline and even after. We kind of heard on Saturday that Noah Hanifin has declared his decision, and he's not interested in re-signing in Calgary.
It was very funny because I was at a birthday party on Saturday for me and a few other of my friends who all have birthdays in the month of February. And it was like 8:00. And I was like, am I going to put Hockey Night in Canada on at the party like I usually do when I'm at a party and put sports on to be in the background? And as everybody else in the living room was playing Flip Cup, I was sitting there on the floor watching the TV like a little kid. And I heard the report like everybody else. And I'm going to reiterate something I've said a lot on the show over the last year or so. When you get a report like that is out there because someone wants it out there, whether it is the team, the agent, or the player. That is only getting reported, especially by Elliott, who we know is somebody who very, very intentionally opaque all of the time to not compromise any sources. So the fact we know that, okay, he wants to move on, that he's not interested in signing an extension, that is either coming from his agent, who is trying to facilitate moving this along, or it's coming from a team that would like to acquire him and is trying to turn up the heat on Calgary to make this move happen so we can get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to remember who your source, like who you're getting this information from, because earlier today, Frank Seravalli basically listed half the league as teams interested in landing Noah Hanifin. And I mean, Of course, someone is going to land him, but
eventually, yeah.
Like, you can't just because you see all these teams doesn't mean, number one, there's any like truth behind it, or any of those teams are actually in on it and he's just getting bad information.
So let's unpack that on two steps. Number one, some of it is informed guessing, that based on what we know, what teams have assets, what teams have cap space, that is where a lot of these columns, these podcasts, where they try and effectively wish cast, who's somebody to where they want them to go. That's effectively what this is at times. It's not that Frank doesn't occasionally get a scoop. He does get scoops. It's more so that he has to fulfill his content obligation. He has to do his show at 12 o'clock. He's got to do podcast hits on other networks. He's got to write his blogs for Daily Faceoff. So he is going to do the best of his understanding. He's going to, based on what he's hearing and what's out there, make an educated guess. As you said, he put together 8 10 teams in his column as potential landing spots. And like, yes, we talked about this a lot last week. Noah Hanifin's a good hockey player. If you add him to the Bruins or the Lightning or the Golden Knights or the Hurricanes, a team that's good, but everybody needs defensemen, especially in the playoffs. They do get hurt very frequently. Most teams on the road to winning a Stanley Cup are going to play 8 or 9 defensemen, sometimes even more than that. So bringing Noah Hanifin in to help your team out would do a lot for a lot of teams. But we also have to, again, like you said, keep in mind where we're getting our reporting from.
Yeah. And I mean, just like we said at the top of the show too, Elliot Friedman is very intentional with the information he puts out there, even when
and the way he says it. And the way he says it. Yeah.
If you listen to 32 Thoughts, really any episode, but the one regarding the Arizona Coyotes situation from 2 weeks ago, that is what I mean when I say he is very careful and intentional, because he can't burn bridges. He can't afford to do it. And I appreciate the way that he relays that information and doesn't just, blow it all up.
No. And one more thing we can add on to that. There's an idea. I know we talked about this in regards to Lindholm, as far as trading him to a landing spot where the extension would be at part of said trade, where the Flames would be able to get more in return as a condition of him agreeing to an extension before being traded, which, again, that may or may not eliminate some teams. We know that Hanifin has expressed an interest in returning to the States, that it would be hard for a Canadian team to convince him to stay long-term past this season. But then we start having to root out, what makes sense and what doesn't. The Leafs absolutely could use Noah Hanifin. We have linked pretty much every player in the league gets excuse me. Wow, words are hard. Every team in the league gets linked to the Leafs. That's a good tongue twister. Try saying that 5 times fast. League linked Leafs. Okay. Yeah. Okay, we're back on the tracks here. But there are so many teams that could use a player like this. It makes sense that 9, 10, 15 teams are going to be in everyone's columns because nobody knows anything. Nobody knows where he's going right now. So they're going to make informed, educated guesses. And if they're right, they'll say, well, I wasn't sure, but I thought maybe it was possible.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, at least for me, I would count out any Canadian team trading for him, especially because, like you said, they're not getting that long-term extension come July 1st. I don't
think the Leafs could do it money-wise.
No. And I appreciate how determined Brad Treliving is, but I just don't think it's going to happen there either. I'm going to say he goes somewhere in the Atlantic Division.
So let's unpack that. We've got a few minutes left in our segment. So Boston, from the area, a need at left-hand D. Forbort and Grzelcyk, I think, are both unrestricted free agents after the season. So naturally, there's a landing spot there for a replacement as a left-handed defenseman. The Panthers have too many defensemen, so I would rule them out, even though he would be better than quite a few of the guys they brought in. They've gotten a really nice bounce-back season from Oliver Ekman-Larsson, Nico Mikkola, still pretty solid, Brandon Montour, Aaron Ekblad. But again, like we said, you never have enough defensemen. Maybe you could do some type of player-for-player thing where somebody goes back to them. The Stars could use a left-handed defenseman, though I'd argue they'd probably be better suited trading for Tanev because they already have several good left-handed defensemen. But as far as landing spots, for me, from a Flames perspective, I just want to get the best return I possibly can. I'm not particularly worried about where he lands. If he gets an extension or not, great. If it helps the Flames, that's what matters to me.
Yeah, because I feel like, especially as a first-time general manager, like we've talked about before, you're bound to kind of have to make those bad trades where you probably could have gotten more in return, like for the Zadorov and Toffoli trade. But I am confident that Craig Conroy has paid his dues, and the Lindholm trade kind of set the precedent.
He got a good return for Lindholm. He got market value from a division rival for a player he wasn't going to be able to keep. Everything, like we said, the day the trade happened, it checked all of the necessary boxes for a successful trade. Now, we won't really be able to evaluate the long-term impact of said trade until we get a better understanding of what that draft pick and the prospects they got in return, and if Kuzmenko is going to stay long-term or not. But at the very least, it checked all of the boxes. We'll get a really good understanding of what Conroy values and what his vision of the team is based on the return he gets for Hanifin.
Yes. And coming up next, we are going to talk about setting up for the bigger picture and what lies ahead for the Calgary Flames. And we will be back right after this. How would you like to get to know someone better in an hour than you would in a year? Understanding one another better prevents small misunderstandings from becoming big, ongoing fights. After providing more than 20 years of service to small and mid-sized businesses, helping management groups navigate conflict and onboarding new employees, Camino is offering a digital seminar for families and couples. Did your Valentine's gift of tickets to the game not go over as well as you'd hoped? Well, you can get in on the Couples and Family online seminar for 25% off for the month of February using discount code LOCKEDON. Again, that is discount code LOCKEDON for 25% off for the rest of the month at www.caminocounseling.ca or mention Locked On when reaching out to a business seminar and receive the first 5 profiles free. Thank you, everyone, for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. How long term do we want to take this lens out? Widen this lens for?
We've got 27 regular season games to go over the course of the next 2.5 months. The Flames know they are not going to be making the playoffs barring an act of God. The goal here is not to make the playoffs. It's not to win the Stanley Cup. It is to get as much information about the guys you have on the team as you possibly can. The next 2.5 months are purely for experimentation. Try every configuration of players you want. Bring up guys from the AHL to audition. If you have anybody in the pipeline that you are curious about, this is the environment you want to bring them into, because it's not that they're not going to try and win these games, because they obviously are. Professional athletes are very competitive people. It's that the more information you have about your group going into the summer, you have a better understanding of what you need to do in the summer to set yourself up for next season.
Absolutely. And it reminds me of right after they fired Jeff Ward and brought in Daryl Sutter. They used those 30 somewhat, probably less, games to get everyone acclimated to the Daryl Sutter system and allow there to be time for tweaking and new configurations at the expense of nothing. Really, because that team was not making the playoffs. And it's kind of like a similar situation now. You have a new coach. I mean, you have players that are leaving, and then you have players that are ready to make the jump. So why not use this additional time to your advantage?
Completely agreed with you there on multiple accounts. And in addition to that, we know it's very hard for teams that are in competitive spots to give guys runway. I forget who was talking about it on the headlines on Hockey Night in Canada a few months ago, but pretty much anybody who wins the Stanley Cup only has one rookie at the most in their lineup. And that's not an indictment of young players. It's just that coaches aren't particularly comfortable with those guys because they feel like they don't have the experience to know how to play in that type of environment. Right. But when you're a team like Calgary that is not going to be making the playoffs, you can bring these guys along, and it's okay if they make mistakes. That's really the big issue some teams have in their retooling or their outright rebuilding process is they have these young guys, but they're so afraid of them making mistakes that they play lower in the lineup. They don't get as good of line mates because they play them with defensively responsible line mates, which is code for bad at hockey a lot of the time. And all you're doing there is bringing down the ceiling of what that player could be. I talk about this a lot in regards to teams like the Rangers have done a very bad job of this over the years. Montreal may or may not be doing this right now. It's a little more in the gray area because they're so much worse than the Rangers were during that rebuilding period. But when you bring those young guys in, you want them to make mistakes because that's how they figure it out. They have to learn what they can and can't get away with in terms of their on-ice play by doing it. And when you don't enable that creativity, foster that creativity, you're stunting the growth of a player.
Absolutely. And that's why I think I really like the Zari, Kadri, and Pospisil line, because everyone, obviously, 2 rookies with a veteran center, but there is room for mistakes. Whether, they immediately go back to the bench and look at the iPad and say, why don't we try this instead? And that's great. And they learn from it. They've talked about it. And you don't have a coach that is, oh my gosh, you turned the puck over and it led to a goal, you're benched. It's like you said, they have that runway, a little bit of leeway. It's not so uptight and high risk.
Yes. And on top of that, and you brought it up and we can segue nicely into this, the guys who are still here, the Kadri, Huberdeau, Weegar, Anderson, part of bringing those young guys into this environment is that those are experienced guys who play at a really high level that these young guys are going to be able to play off of and just get a better understanding of what they need to be doing to be NHL players. We talked about it in regards to, if you don't want to be here, that's fine. More power to you. Go to an environment where you can either get the money you want, live closer to your family, win, whatever your main priority is. Go be somewhere where that's going to be possible.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be here, that's fine. But for the guys who do want to be here, and I wrote this exact phrase down in my notes, what does it mean to be a Flame? What does it mean to be a Flame going forward? And we know we're probably not going to win a lot of games the rest of the way here, but the bones and the identity of future Calgary Flames teams are going to be laid out over the next 22 games. 27 games, excuse me.
Well, that's a really good way to put it. And I instantly thought of Mike Babcock making Mitch Marner rank his veteran opponent or veteran teammates from laziest to not laziest or whatever. I don't see that happening here, thankfully. But those are important questions to ask, because what do you want to get out of your NHL career? Are you okay starting it off like this and building through this adversity? Or do you want to, I don't want to call it taking the easy way out because it's still a professional sport, or do you just want to be thrown into a winning situation?
It really is different. Every single player is different, but for the veterans who are still here, and we're going to get a lot of clarity. I know Eric Francis said last week that he does expect Markstrom to eventually get traded, but again, we only know what we know. Tanev has been available for quite a while now, and Hanifin we know is available. So if we talk about a team that trades all 3 of those guys, let's get weird with it the rest of the way here. Throw these guys out there. I want to see Matt Coronado get an extended look over the next few months. I want Dustin Wolf, of the 27 games remaining, especially if they trade Markstrom, I want him to get 14, 15 of them. Yeah. I'm perfectly fine if you want to keep running Vladar out there and do a 1A, 1B type deal, but I want to see as much experimentation as possible because we just need more information. We don't know what the future of this team is going to look like. And part of that is because the team's been old and expensive for quite a while now. So now we have a little bit of runway. And we talked about this in regards to Dustin Wolf last week. Give us something to be optimistic about. If you are constantly throwing young guys out there, They're making mistakes, but they're learning as they're playing. They're getting opportunities. That gives me as a fan something to be hopeful about, that maybe one of these guys will put it together. Connor Zary came out of nowhere this year and is probably going to be a Calder guy. Pospisil has really stuck after being pretty much a career AHLer to this point. That is encouraging. Not every guy they call up or draft or trade for is going to be successful.
Right.
But the more guys you try, maybe you get lucky. Maybe somebody else you're not expecting hits.
Yeah, and that's kind of the beauty of this. You do have this what if situation, and it's something, like you've said, you can be hopeful for. You don't have to put all of your eggs in one basket. We can kind of finagle certain situations and going forward, and there's really nothing on the line besides maybe a few spots in the draft, if that. So we'll have to see. And who knows? This is hockey.
No one knows. That's part of what this is, though.
Yeah.
Somebody sent me a tweet about it earlier. Someone sent me a tweet earlier today and said, sports are a lot closer to theater and art than they are math and science.
Yes.
Because there's an inherent human element within it that we will never be able to quantify, because the way people's emotions make them feel and how they feel about their games, that you can't totally understand everything. And that makes us uncomfortable as sports fans. We want to know.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to talk more about what we want to know with Dustin Wolf's future with the Flames coming up right after this. We are past the halfway point in the season, Flames fans, and I'm sure many of us are looking forward to the days on the golf course. Regardless of where you are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you can win big by playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. Sleeper is our number one choice for daily fantasy sports, and especially daily fantasy hockey, because with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in daily fantasy hockey contests. Nick, did you do any betting this weekend while you enjoyed yourself?
Yes.
The series?
We were in the MetLife parking lot yesterday, and we were talking about what we were going to do, and we all loaded up on individual players. Panarin shooting the puck like a lunatic this season. He's great to throw in your sleeper picks.
Yeah. So all you have to do is pick whether studs like Panarin, Crosby, or McDavid will record more or less than their sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times bet on Sleeper, you need to correctly predict the outcome of 8 player stats. You heard me, Flames fans. You can win 100 times your money playing daily fantasy hockey with Sleeper. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL and you'll get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper's terms of use for details and locational availability. Thanks everyone for hanging out with us today on Locked On Flames. Throw us a 5-star rating on iTunes if you have 30 seconds. That would be super cool. What else would be really cool is if people didn't write off Dustin Wolf after 7 NHL appearances.
Goaltending is the most inexplicable and hardest to evaluate position in hockey. People put a lot of blame on the goaltender because it is the only position in sports where perfection is the expectation. I do not know why, and I talk about this a lot. I don't know why broadcasts and more conventional linear hockey media companies don't explain the nuances of the game within the broadcast a little bit more. There will be, the better broadcasts do to some degree. They'll explain, well, he didn't see the puck, it got redirected, it's a 2-on-1, it's a 3-on-1, that type of context. And some people will say, well, you're making excuses, he's got to make saves. Yes, of course, the goalie does have to make saves eventually. But in a game where you get shelled, where it's 6-1, 7-1, not all 7 of those are his fault. that's the thing that I get frustrated with when we talk about goalies. The Islanders and Rangers, the Lightning, these are teams with genuinely good goalies who have multi-year track records of being good, like Shesterkin, Sorokin, Vasilevsky, and they're not playing particularly well this season. None of them are. But you have people saying, well, you got to ride the hot hand. You got to go to the backup. Like that's a serious solution, when in reality, you need to give these guys as much opportunity as you can to get their game going again, because when they're on their game, they're great. So that should be the goal here with Dustin Wolf. Build him up. Make him feel good about his game. Play better in front of him. I know we talked about this last Friday, but the defense was horrendous in that game against San Jose. I mean, the three of the 7 San Jose goals were directly off of turnovers in their own zone.
And that's, you don't want to see that. You absolutely do not want to see that, regardless if it's a veteran goalie like Markstrom or a rookie like Wolf in net. It's so frustrating too, because he has just been a star throughout his development. And I think people just kind of expected him to make a clean cut jump, as if there isn't a difference between playing in the AHL and the NHL. And that confidence probably has to be shaken, I would assume.
For sure. When it's been easy, you're used to it being easy. When you face adversity for the first time and you're not used to that type of adversity, it changes you. Individuals or individual players or whole teams. We talk about the President's Trophy curse of great teams not facing any adversity in the regular season, and then they get into the playoffs and they get punched in the mouth for the first time, and they don't know how to react because they haven't been in that situation all year. Same thing for Wolf. We're talking about a player, who's got a handful of NHL starts, 2 years in the AHL, 2.5 years in the AHL, with good numbers in the AHL and before that in the WHL, but this is not a linear process, and that frustrates people. And again, it speaks to what we were talking about before, the idea that sports are closer to art than they are science, because there is a feel element to this, that if Wolf is going to be the guy that his AHL numbers would tell you, and generally speaking, dominating at the AHL level like Wolf did, is an indicator that he is capable of eventually being good at the NHL level. It's going to take time, though.
Yeah. You need the consistency, and one start every 3 months isn't going to do you anything good. Like, I'm just a big proponent of that consistency. And of course, it doesn't have to be every night. Like, no, that's why you have a $6 million goaltender, but integrating him into the lineup more. And I feel like the only way they're going to do that this year is if they trade Markstrom.
Yes, I do agree with you. I think that's part of why it'd be important to facilitate a Markstrom trade, is because Markstrom, more likely than not, even if he were on the team next year and the year after that, he's not in the team's long-term planning. And frankly, that's got to be the Flames' priority, is not next year or even the year after that, frankly. We're probably talking about the Flames as ready to compete again 2 to 3 seasons from now. And you got to take your lumps as part of this building process. And that includes Dustin Wolf, who is going to have ups and he's going to have downs. But eventually, you'll either know if he's a guy or not. If we're doing the 70-30 split where he's only going to get a start every other week or every 4th game, you're not going to have as much information as you could. And again, these games, it's not that they don't matter. It's that the winning and losing itself doesn't particularly matter for this particular iteration of the team, because as I just said, it is about 2 or 3 years from now, not right now.
Yep. And you can use this time to really feel out what's working, what's not, and play with different variables. Yes, that's the more science and math part of it, but at the same time, like, that's always going to be there. And they say practice makes perfect, and every night the Flames go out there, it's basically just a dress rehearsal before their big performance in like 3 years. So they've got plenty of time to get to that spot, but it's about successfully navigating that roadmap to success.
Very well said. I will just add on to that idea. This is going to be bumpy. This is going to be frustrating. This isn't going to be, man, they missed a playoff spot by 4 or 5 points. No. This is going to be, they're in the lottery and you're hoping they're picking third as opposed to eighth. That's really what we're talking about here for the next year or two. Especially if they trade Markstrom and really go into the uncharted waters of the goalie carousel, which is not a fun place to be.
No, that is never fun, but it's a ride that I think many people are ready to buckle up for and see the sunshine on the other side.
Yeah, you got to do it, man. If you want to rebuild, you got to be about that life.
Yep. So take your lumps and the hard times will pay off. But that does it for us here on today's episode of Locked On Flames. Thank you all for tuning in and just making the show part of your day. Remember to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. You can follow us on Twitter at JustBelmosto and at Nick Zararis. Nick, do you have any parting words for Flames fans today?
They're going to play the Jets in like 20 minutes, so I'll have more thoughts after that.